That my breath is all caught and we're ready to go. Today, we're going to be talking about preparing for a conference presentation. We'll have a lot of emphasis on really preparing for the MWASA presentation with a couple of nuggets about national presentations and how to prepare for other types of presentations as well. So again, my name is Chelsea Potts. I'm the Assistant Dean of Undergraduate of Education, and I oversee our Exploratory Studies Office.
Hi, everyone. My name is Valerie Weston. We'll be Butterfield in about a month or so. And I am an academic advisor in the Honors College and one of the chairs of the MWASA Symposium Committee. So, oh yeah, I'm doing this one. Sorry. So before we get started, we wanted to go the overview of how we're going to structure this presentation today. So first, we're going to go over the learning outcomes of this presentation, talking a bit about presentation types for both regional national conferences and the MWASA Symposium more specifically. We'll go over some guidelines for how to complete your proposal if you're interested in presenting at a conference. And then also kind of tips and tricks for what to do on preparing for your presentation, what to think about during your presentation, some assessment pieces, things like that.
It's not a presentation if you don't take yourself off mute. So for this presentation, our presentation learning outcomes are going to be, we want everyone to walk away from this recognizing how to outline a presentation from development to delivery, understanding how to develop effective learning outcomes for presentations, identify presentation strategies for audience engagement, presentation delivery, and assessment, and then understand how to create a presentation proposal for the MWASA Symposium. And then a little nugget would be for it to encourage all of you all to submit a presentation proposal for the MWASA Symposium. So looking at our different presentation types, there's different type of presentations that you can do depending on what you're actually looking to present. So the most common presentations are going to be your oral presentations. You can do those as a single individual, you can do them as a group, and then you can also do those as a workshop style session. Some people like to combine the lecture presentations with the workshop, and that does lead to it being a lot more engaging for participants and making sure that you can understand how to kind of pull out some of those outcomes and really get people engaged in the work that you're doing and discussing. Another presentation style is a discussion panel. So when you're talking about a discussion panel, what you want to do is you want to actually look at a topic from a wide perspective and really just get different perspectives on that, right? So let's say, for example, if you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, you might not want to get very deep into diversity specifically or how to create belonging, but maybe you just want to give people an overall thought about how people think about it and how maybe you can possibly think about that. That would be a good example of how you can use a discussion panel. And then we have our poster presentations. So for me, poster presentations actually scare me the most. The reason why they do scare me the most is because you have to put all of this information onto a poster and then people ask you questions. You don't know what the questions are going to be about, but you're like, okay, here I am, and here's all my work, and here it all is right here. And so if you're the type of person that really just likes that style of presentation, you want to make sure that you can just go ahead and lay out everything that you have and just talk to specific questions about your work, or maybe how someone can duplicate a study or maybe a program that you've done. That would be where you would use a poster presentation.
All right. So the specific types of presentations that you'll see at the MWASA Symposium most commonly are either the 60-minute workshop or the 25-minute lecture. And so this is some guidance on kind of trying to decide which one of these categories your presentation idea falls into. For a 60-minute workshop, it should definitely be a more informative and interactive presentation. It is an hour. We want it to be a workshop that has some sort of engaging activity or discussion with the participants in that session. It's good for complex topics, maybe doing a big discussion group with people to crowdsource ideas that we may all be trying to collaborate with something on. A goal for these workshops is definitely that attendees should take away something that they can bring back to their offices, whether it is a new skill, a new resource, an idea that other offices could take advantage of. We really want to steer away from these being just 60-minute lectures. We do want them to be a little more informative, hence the workshop title in there. We usually only have 2 or 3 60-minute workshops per symposium. So you'll want to make sure that if you are gearing towards that workshop, make sure you have like a reason to have it be that hour-long session. For the 25-minute lecture, we have much more of these at the symposium, specifically just based on the scheduling abilities. These are definitely meant to be short presentations to teach your attendees something with time for them to ask you questions. So I've seen successful versions of this in the past when, maybe something new has happened in your office that you want more of the community to be aware of. It's great, and it's great for an opportunity for updating your campus partner so we're on the same page. If you have a cool skill or something that you want to teach other people, that's also a good opportunity. If you have a passion idea that you want to teach others about that may be helpful to the university community as well, that's good for this lecture. It is only 25 minutes, so that time definitely does sneak up on people. So if you have like interactive group elements, make sure you are being intentional about that and that it has purpose driven behind that. We all typically do offer the option to do poster presentations at the symposium. There's not usually a whole lot of demand for it, but we'll see. If there's a demand for it, we might give it a try. But when you see the proposal form, these will be the most common that we will see. So another thing to keep in mind is, especially with any presentation across the board, but with the symposium too, you are more than welcome to do your presentation by yourself or with a small group. I know myself, example this, I'm usually a little bit more comfortable presenting with at least one other person or with a small group. So I do like working with other people for presentations. Individual presentations are good if you want to share your expertise on a specific topic. If you want to practice presenting in front of your peers, the symposium is a great way to do that either way. Increase your professional visibility, get your name out there, and build awareness for yourself and your departments. The group presentation, you can work with really anybody. So I've seen most of the time people working with people in their office or somewhere else at the university. But if you have a colleague or a friend from another school that maybe you share an interest on working on something, feel free to bring them to the symposium. We're happy to have them. As long as usually one person works here, that's okay. So don't feel afraid to collaborate outside of your office if you have a cool thing that you want to do at the symposium. You can showcase your different perspectives on a topic and make sure that the audience stays engaged when having multiple people talking to them instead of just one. And it's a great opportunity for collaboration. Whoops. Okay, so some tips on selecting a presentation topic specifically for the symposium. Like I mentioned, if you have a skill or updates from your office, the symposium is a great place for that because we do have a lot of people together in one place. I know when we made the transition from the honors program to the honors college, we did a symposium session to tell people what that meant for your honors students. And so it's a great way to get a lot of people to learn about your updates. I also want to emphasize that the symposium can be a great place to practice a presentation that you may want to do at a different conference. So if you have a goal to present at a national or regional conference, but you might want to do it in a smaller space first surrounded by your peers instead of strangers, the symposium is a great way to practice that. So make sure to keep that in mind. And then, yeah, if there's a passion area that maybe you're doing your own research on or you would like to, feel free.
So one of the topics that I've noticed that people get really stuck on, and almost maybe discourages some folks from submitting a topic is just the idea of what do you actually talk about. Everyone wants to talk about something that is going to resonate. No one wants to, you picture, the presentations that you've gone to that you haven't been engaged in, and you fear being that person that people may wonder, well, what were they talking about? I don't understand that, or I didn't take anything away from that. And so these are a couple of tips that can just kind of help you simplify that process. So think about your target audience as you 1 year ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. Think about the things that you wish you would have known. Sometimes I will exercise and just kind of write a letter to myself. That was something that I did maybe about a couple of months ago. Just what was my journey in higher ed? And then what did I learn that was much different than now? And then how did I get to that point? And then how can I teach other people how to alleviate some of those barriers? So that's one thing that you can do to just kind of think about what is it that I would need to know. That's also a good way to gain your confidence about your expertise around certain areas, because then you'll begin to realize that you were really far away from where you are now. And now you can really kind of get confidence in the fact that you built those skills and that you're now confident enough to at least bring them to others, and even presenting it as a conversation as well. So drawing inspiration from articles, newsletters, just everyday inspiration that can even happen around the coffee table or around the water cooler, as we used to say it, around the break times. So thinking about the things that your colleagues are frustrated with, every day. If it's something that you guys get excited about every day, or something that you say, wow, this program really works for us, thinking about that and then looking at articles and seeing what people are doing and then thinking about how you can tie those in together. Something that was just brought up that I saw that came across was getting students to the 6-year finish line. And what are some of the barriers that come from students not wanting to continue and graduate after the pandemic? So looking at that and just thinking about how you can bring context to that at Miami, for example, and thinking about a presentation around that can be an idea. So connecting to the conference theme is also another good way to think about a topic selection. So a lot of conferences, actually most conferences, will have some sort of theme or some sort of subtopics that you can then connect to. So thinking about what those are, and then how can you tweak the topic that you already have to fit the theme. Sometimes you can draw from the theme, and then sometimes you might say, I really want to talk about this, but I don't think this fits. Make it fit. You can always figure out a way to make it fit or tie it in, and that way people can say, oh, I never thought about that perspective. And then you can then bring that to that conference. And then don't shoo off small ideas. If it's too small, do not think that you cannot go deep into that idea and really kind of talk about all the things that people may not think about. Sometimes as humans, we kind of undermine our ability to understand how to think about something, or we may think something is very small, but it's actually really complex. For example, I like to give examples, so I'll give you all another one. I was talking to one of my friends who does conference presentations all the time right before I got on this call and before I was running over here to Rowdy-Bush, but on the phone talking with her, and she said, well, why are you doing a presentation about how to do a presentation? Why would you do a presentation on that? And I said, well, let's think about all that you learned over the years of how to prepare for your presentations. And when we broke it down, she said, oh, I guess I didn't think about that. So again, don't shoo off those small ideas. It can really lead to a really great presentation that you may not have thought would go as well as it did. So looking at how do you develop your presentation? So I like to use analogies in presentations because they help me stick with ideas. And so we'll use this as more of a storyboard or creating a book chapter, creating a book as your presentation guide. So the first thing you want to do is you want to determine what your presentation purpose is. So developing your topic, and then what is the purpose of your presentation? So those will be two different things. You'll have, let's say, first generation college students, but what is it that you want to learn about first generation college students? And then moving forward and saying, what are the subtopics, or what are the chapters going to be about your book? So maybe it's first generation college students and you want to talk about cultural capital, or you want to talk about intersectionality, or you want to talk about types of institutions. Those can be your certain book chapters that you go through and figure out how you're going to build your presentation to wrap around your topic. And then from that exercise, you can then see from your chapters, what do I want people to learn from each section or each chapter that we're talking about in this presentation? So when you're thinking about that, you can then begin to see, okay, do I really want people to walk away from this with this impression, or do they need to know this information, or do I have time to reach that particular learning outcome? And so you can begin to develop those step by step by looking at your chapter guidelines or your sections of your presentation. And if you're doing a group presentation, you'll also want to really take some time to look at each section length and then your speaker assignments. So who is talking about what for what amount of time? If you're working with the group, it's really good to lean on each other's expertise in certain areas. And so if everyone is really excited around a certain topic, well, which pieces are you excited about and most comfortable talking about that you feel comfortable delivering and covering your section on? If you are doing an individual presentation, it's going to be really important to look at how much time you want to spend on each section. So in times when you're thinking about a slide, or you're thinking about the content on a slide, or what you're going to say, do you really want to spend time talking about one thing versus the other? And then what impact will that have on your student learning outcomes? So for developing student learning outcomes, because one of the things that I knew always intimidated me was, how do I develop a learning outcome? And when you're looking at your learning outcomes, outcomes are measurable statements that articulate what a participant or a student or whoever you're delivering your learning to should know, be able to do, or what they should value in attending a session. When you're talking about conference presentations, you have a very short amount of time to deliver your content. So really looking at, how do you map what you want your participants to learn, and then can they actually do that within that time period? Or do you want to expose? Do you want to change thought? Just kind of thinking about those things. So they describe learning outcomes, describe information, skills, or perspectives that participants will acquire from attending your session. They identify the outcomes or actions that they can expect to demonstrate. And then you also will then cross map. So going back to that previous slide, you'll be cross mapping your student learning outcomes to your content, which is also called backwards design in the curriculum and design world. So for your learning outcomes, you want them to be SMART. I know this is an acronym that we hear all the time, and it's very important when you're creating your student learning outcomes as well. So I won't read off all of them. I think we all have heard SMART for years and know what all those terms mean. But I do want to point out some things that do point directly to learning outcomes, which is the attainable piece. So going back to the verbs, we'll go into Bloom's taxonomy, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. But we'll go into Bloom's taxonomy and the different verbs that you can use. But for an example, when you're talking about what can be attainable, so let's say you're doing a panel on, I'm going to keep throwing out random examples. Let's say we're doing adult learners, and you want to expose people to what adult learners struggle with, right? You wouldn't want to do an outcome that says, I want people to be able to develop a adult learning program at their institution when they leave my 45-minute presentation, because you won't be able to obtain that. But you can provide them with the tools to then do further research to create their own program in their institutional context. So kind of wording those to be attainable is really important. Also looking at if they are actually results focused. And a result can be just information sharing. That's something that I think can be always overlooked. It's just, I'm just sharing information. I don't really think they're going to actually learn, or I don't think they're going to actually do anything, but I do want them to be exposed to it and think differently about it. That is a result that you can get that is actually viable, that you can do. So looking at Bloom's taxonomy, which is going to be on the next slide, this will teach you how to develop a part of a learning outcome. Now, I'm a little nervous about this because I want to make sure that we can build confidence in you all to create a learning outcome, because there are going to be a part of your MWASA proposal. So when you're looking at a learning outcome, you have an introductory phrase, you have an action verb, and then you have an explicitly stated observable skill or knowledge. So if you look at Bloom's taxonomy is basically a learning, I would say, assessment of what level of learning. So if you look at Bloom's, it starts with just the baseline of just remembering, right? So when we think about just information, can I recall it? Can I remember it? Can I define it? You have your understanding level, which is, can you classify it? Can you explain it to another person? Can you recognize it if you were to see it? And then applying it is a next level of learning, where you can then see, can I actually take this information and apply it in my own context? Can I actually use this information and take it somewhere else and do something a little bit different with it? And analyzing is the next phase. And that's when you really start to get into well, what does this really mean? I know what it is, I understand it, I can apply it, but does this actually work? Can I actually do this work here? Can I, kind of figure out how to distinguish it between other things? And then evaluation. So looking at you're justifying a stand or a decision. So now that you've analyzed it and now you're evaluating, okay, you're critiquing. So if you're looking at peer reviews, like when you were in classes, that's kind of an evaluation. And then creation. So producing new work and original work is really the top level of learning when you're talking about Bloom's taxonomy. So when you're looking at your learning outcomes, if you want someone to create something, then you want to make sure that you build around your program to meet that outcome of them creating something. So that's just pretty much a basic overview of Bloom's taxonomy, but it gives you a good idea of what level do you want your participants in your session to walk away with? What level of learning do you want them to walk away with that you feel like would be beneficial for you? I put a couple, oh, go back. Sorry. So I put a couple of examples over here of just learning outcomes and what they can be. So 3 of them are participants. One of them is participants will define 3 primary academic advising approaches. You know who's going to do it. It was the participants. They're going to define, and they'll be able to do 3 specific academic advising approaches. I just made these up. You're not learning about academic advising approaches today, but that gives you an example of a very just simple learning outcome. The next one is participants will be able to distinguish between 3 advising approaches. So that's one more level up, but that's kind of going into that analyzation. Can you differentiate between different advising approaches? And the last example would be participants will develop a personal academic advising approach. So now we're talking about the creation of something. They will walk away from this imaginary session knowing how to develop a personal academic advising approach. And so if you can see how kind of these 3 different approaches they're attached to the same thing, but they're looking at 3 different levels of learning. And so when you're talking about learning outcomes, you also want to see if you can assess learning outcomes. Learning outcomes in presentations when it comes to assessment can be a little tricky because you can not necessarily do a survey at the end. I mean, they usually have an overall survey, but it's going to be hard to do that for your particular session. So a way that you can do this and kind of incorporate it in a less formal way or informal way is looking at different activities that you can do. We're going to do one in a few seconds. So you can do an activity with people. You can do entry and exit tickets. So when people come in, kind of asking them a couple of questions and saying, hey, do you guys know about X, Y, and Z? What is your knowledge level on this? And at the end, gauging, well, how comfortable do you feel now that you've heard this presentation about X, Y, and Z? And that can give you a good visual representation on if you met the outcomes of your presentation. Also using engagement technology tools like Kahoot is a good one where you can do a quick quiz or just kind of a quick assessment of what people know, or you can quiz them on maybe something that you covered over the presentation. There's other tools like Poll Everywhere. I'm missing one of them, but we'll send out a sheet after this that will cover those. But there's a lot of different tools that you can use that people can access from their mobile devices during your presentation that you can kind of assess, are they getting it? Is this landing? Does this make sense? When you're doing virtual presentations, Zoom polls are a great way. And then also utilizing breakout rooms. There are sometimes, and I will admit to being guilty of this, that I'll get to a breakout room and my brain turns on. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I have to do something now. And so that's really a good way to increase your engagement, but then also kind of use that as a tool. And you can go to each breakout room and just kind of gather the conversations and see if they're really getting what you're saying as far as your learning outcomes. So we're going to take a stab at that now. So we're going to have everyone create their own learning outcome. I played around with the different ideas of how we want to do this, but I think the best way to do it in this setting is just going to be to ask you all to individually create a student learning outcome for a potential topic that you may be interested in presenting at the Mawassa Symposium. Could you go back to the examples for the Bloom's taxonomy just for reference? So we'll keep this here and we'll give you guys about, I would say, 4 minutes to come up with just a simple learning outcome for a topic that you may be interested in possibly doing. And then at that point, we'll have at least 2 to 3 people, if they're willing to share and excited about their learning outcome, share those learning outcomes, and then we'll kind of talk those through. And I'll pop that in the chat in case anybody missed it. Connor, I have my teacher hat on and you look really ready, like you want to volunteer almost.
Well, if that's me being called on, I would gladly, Chelsea, because my
Okay.
presentation next week for Mwasa Community Development, that actually works in perfectly. So next
Hey.
week, the general theme is health and nutrition, like everyday life. So the 3 examples I wrote down would be: participants will be able to define 3 common myths about health and nutrition. Participants will be able to identify 3 strategies or changes they can make in their everyday life and implement. And then we'll be able to understand the differences between carbs, fats, and proteins, and the importance they play in a good nutritional balance.
Perfect. Those were really, really good. I like that I saw that you used the identify from the understand level in different things as well. So yes, thank you for using some of those verbs. Would anyone else be willing to share? You can also feel free to share in the chat if you would like to. And we still have about 1 minute left. So if you're not ready yet, that's okay too.
Yeah, I can share mine. I don't know if like I feel like I went to the create zone, which is the lofty goal. But I was thinking about maybe working with how do we communicate effectively with our caseloads and to create engagement with them. So something to the effect of, like, participants will be able to design a communication plan for their caseloads that emphasize an increase in student engagement with their specific advisor.
That is really good. That's really
Now I
good.
have to do this presentation. Is that what I heard? Shoot.
Yeah, you can. I mean, honestly, you could do that. I was interested. All right. Do we have one more volunteer that would like to share what they came up with for their learning outcomes? These are really good. Right. Well, we got a lot of great examples with that. So we'll move forward, but feel free to send those in the chat as we go forward in the presentation if you wanted to share your learning outcome as well.
All right. So now we're gonna move on to talking about actually completing your proposal for both the Mwasa Symposium more specifically, and then also more generally. So we have just finalized our proposal timeline, so get excited. For those of you who have not heard yet, the symposium for this year will be on Wednesday, May 3rd. We're trying the end of the semester. Hopefully that'll be a little bit less chaotic than party registration, which is what happened last year. And you'll get an email about this in our next week or so, but our theme for this year's symposium will be supporting students, sustaining ourselves. So it is also another health and wellness, making sure that we are taking care of ourselves and our advising community so that we can also support our students to the best of our abilities. So keep that in mind as far as theme, if you wanted to do a theme related proposal. So the proposal form is not finalized yet, so don't worry about that. If you think you lost it, you did not. We have not sent it yet. It will be done before we break for December. So keep an eye out. We'll send out a MUASA listserv with that form once it is ready. So the intention is to give you all time during J term and February to create your proposal. So you will have until Friday, March 3rd to submit your proposal form. The committee will have about 3 weeks to look through your proposal forms and decide who we would like to extend an offer to present at the symposium by the end of March. And then that gives you a month before the symposium to finalize your presentation. This year, we also will be asking anyone who agrees to present at the symposium for an outline of your presentation before the symposium. This will probably be like a week or two before, so you won't need to have everything done. We just want to see an outline so that we kind of have an idea of what everyone is talking about. So with the proposal form in particular, the topics that you will need to have an answer for is you will need a title for your presentation, an abstract. This year, we're going to be asking you about who your target audience is, as that might be able to help people know if that's a presentation that they should go to or not. Which type of presentation you're opting for, so the 60-minute, the 25-minute, or poster. And your learning outcomes will also be a component of your proposal. So keep that in mind, with what we learned about learning outcomes today. We ask you to be clear and concise as possible, and to make sure that you have a clear point to your presentation. And keep in mind that the abstract that you submit in your proposal, unless you change it otherwise and let us know, that will be your presentation description in the conference program. So we typically use those abstracts in the conference program so that people know what your thing is about. So make sure that your proposal has a clear vision. If we can't tell what it's about, we probably won't accept it. So make sure you can explain it to us so that everyone else can also know what's going on. And as Chelsea said, we encourage you to align with the conference theme, but it is not required. So the entire symposium does not need to be health and wellness, but we do encourage at least trying to connect it a little bit to that theme.
So we wanted to end with just a couple of general presentation tips. We'll also, and I've committed myself to kind of taking another document for leaders, and once you guys, leaders of groups, if you do have a group presentation, and then we'll send that out as soon as I completed one after the presentation, and so that you'll get that as well. But just quickly going over just what to do before a presentation. So just reiterating, to determine which presentation type fits your topic. This is really important when just thinking about going deep versus wide. How many presenters do you want to have? If you are going to do an individual presentation, how deep do you want to go? Or do you really just want to have a broad conversation about a broader topic? And then creating a presentation storyboard. So this is really important, and it actually does save you a lot of time and work when you're thinking about which slides that you would like to create and what you want to highlight on those slides. A cool way to do it is you can do it using a whiteboard online. You can also do like I do and then use Post-it notes and just kind of put those and move those around in different positions. If you're in a bigger group, you can even use the big Post-it sheets and kind of move around and do things like that. So it's just a good way to actually kind of look at your storyboard or your presentation, and then really clarify the vision. Are you meeting the learning objectives that your group or yourself would like to? And then does the vision of the presentation actually match what you all have in your head or what you were imagining, and then thinking about how you can tweak that before you get to the actual presentation. Again, developing the participant learning outcomes, which is really a part of the storyboarding process. And if you do it that way, it does make it a lot easier. And then creating activities to engage your audience. This is really important, especially when you're talking about Zoom. I know we all experience Zoom fatigue. You're not alone in that if you do. And so creating those activities really does help people to get more engaged into what you're doing. And then it gives better satisfaction for you as a presenter as well. And then a strategy for timekeeping and transitions is really important, especially for larger groups. Making sure that you have someone that will be there to know how the transitions are going to go and flow, and then how much time that you're going to be using for each section. With groups, sometimes people can go over or under, but if you practice ahead of time, that can alleviate some of that, and then you can avoid going into one of your co-presenters' time. During the presentation, always remember first to breathe. That's not on the slide, but I do want to be remiss if I did not say that. Always make sure you breathe. A tip that I like to use is keep your mouth slightly open so that your breath can actually escape your mouth, or you might end up holding your breath on accident. I've done it before. It's not fun. So just continue to make sure that you're breathing and keep that in mind. And then using your, when your presenters or co-presenters are presenting, really just taking time to yourself so that you can begin to calm your nerves, especially if you're going to be presenting next. And then engaging with your co-presenters with excitement. Sometimes when you're preparing, you might be a little nervous and you're looking at your sheets, but then people that are in the presentation are looking at that. And so your engagement as a co-presenter is just important when you're on stage talking versus when you're in the audience and you're engaging with the audience. So just making sure that you're engaging, that you're asking questions. If you see that people aren't jumping in, just kind of, helping your co-presenters along during the presentation. Using analogies also helps. So the story guide or storybook example that I used was one example, but you can use a lot of different analogies that can help people remember what you actually talked about in a way that maybe they wouldn't if you didn't use an analogy. After your presentation, we all like to breathe and say, okay, we're done. It's a really, really good practice to go back and then have a reflection meeting and talk about the presentation. How did it actually go? Was it clear? Was it clear? Did it flow? Was the timing like you thought? Did you think that something was going to land that really didn't and you want to tweak it? And then also challenge yourself to say, should we take this show on the road? Right? Was this a really good stepping stone? We can really improve X, Y, and Z things. And now we want to take this and then go to NACADA, or we want to take this and then do it again next year, but at a larger scale. So those reflection meetings are a really good time to get that fresh feedback from the presentation. And then just say, instead of maybe saying it's over, maybe saying, okay, what's next? And this is the end of our presentation. We'll now open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
I have a question for the esteemed Chelsea and Valerie presenters. I don't know if I missed it. Sorry, answer little emails here and there, but in terms of like just general presentation tips, I think it's one of those things that differs between each person, like what they kind of go with, but maybe just your personal thoughts on like important things to know when actually presenting, like, for instance, the rule of like kind of looking around the room or anything that you guys would have any feedback on that.
So I have some feedback on that. So one thing that is a weird tip kind of is figuring out where you're going to stand during the presentation is really important, especially with group presentations. But I don't know if you ever been in that spot where you're like, what should I do? Like, should I move? Should I stand? So figuring that out. And then as you're looking out, make sure that if you're looking out, you're looking around, you're connecting. I always like to hit the T and then kind of go out from there. So hitting the middle of the room, here, and then in other times, just kind of looking around, smiling, shaking my head, just kind of depending on that. One thing I have to always be careful of is not to overuse nonverbal gestures. So I have that bad. So just not doing that, kind of keeping that in mind, but then just kind of giving normal engagement. And then I'll also try to remove things out of my hands, notebooks, pencils, pens, any of those things, because I will begin to fidget. And so I will remove those so that way people aren't distracted by my fidgeting and nervousness and during the presentation.
Also, if I may offer my own thing too, I know I used to always, I probably still do, but say like and like a bunch. I always just try to remind myself for a presentation, it's okay to have a slight pause. It's better to have a slight pause than be like, bunch to like, just for everyone else. I know I struggle with that a ton, but I just try to remind myself before I start, like, it's okay to not talk constantly.
Yes. And I'll add to that the 7-second rule that I learned. When you ask for questions, wait 7 seconds and just count to yourself. I still can't count to myself. I count it out loud, but count to 7 seconds and to allow people to ask questions so you don't cut anybody off before you move on.
I have a question. Where do you find the balance in presenting like maybe Nakata work or other resources work mixed in with like kind of your own I guess jazz, so to speak? So like where do you find the divide on like presenting purely someone else's research while also showing a little bit about what you do?
So I would say if I'm doing a poster presentation, that's when I'll lean more on other folks' research primarily, and then just talking about how maybe I use their research to go into a program. If I'm doing a presentation, how I find that balance is more so giving people the nugget of where I drew my information from for validation purposes, more so of here's where I got this information from. Here is this particular scholar that presented this, and here is how they did it. And I'll provide their framework. And then the rest of the presentation will just be focused on how I actually use that work. So I try to give a little bit of context, but not enough to where it takes away from what I'm doing, but enough to where if there is someone that is more skeptical and they want to know where you got it from, that you still just have that piece there.
Any more questions? I was gonna say, are there any more questions for our presenters? Okay. Well, then I guess we can just, I will say thank you both so much. I know that this was awesome and I really, I'm excited to, maybe we can have this out to other folks too, so they can get the takeaways. But thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you all for being here today. Yeah, anybody, if anyone has any other ideas for any other ideas for ideas? Okay. Any other ideas for professional development, please let us know. But we look forward to having you all present at the symposium or at least put something out there to try, right? So awesome. Enjoy the rest of your finals week. I hope that it is quiet in your offices, and we'll see you in January, everyone. Thank you.